Hi, I'm Jessica Brown from the Centre for Independent Studies, and I'm here at Concilium at Coolum with Emile Hokayem, the Senior Fellow for Regional Security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in Bahrain. Welcome to Australia. First of all, do you think that the uprisings in the Middle East that we've seen this year can lead to real transitions to democracy?
Well, this is still very uncertain because in the couple of countries where there is actually a transition, Tunisia and Egypt, things are going not so smoothly. Actually, in Tunisia, it is going smoothly now that the different parties have agreed on a real timetable, a sequencing. I'm cautiously optimistic about Tunisia. In Egypt, however, the transition process has run into real difficulties with a lot of anger on the street about the pace of the transition, the amount of change in the political system, and so on. In other countries in the region, most notably Libya, where you have a civil war, and Syria and Yemen, where you actually have quasi-civil wars, things are look even worse. However, it's dangerous to argue that this series of upheaval can only worsen the situation in the Middle East as a whole. In fact, the situation was really bad before they started it. And just delaying the process of political change, I think, would have just made it worse down the road.
Okay, so do you think that there's been a stalling in the Arab Spring, or are we seeing the same pace of change we were seeing over the last few months?
Well, first, I don't call it Arab Spring.
Okay.
I call it Arab awakening. I stress the word awakening because it's really a process.
Yeah.
I mean, the notion that those transitions are linear, that somehow there is a best way to proceed is wrong, if not disingenuous. It puts much more. It places very high expectations on Arabs that didn't exist, that we didn't place on other populations that went through similar processes. But yes, I mean, things are certainly harder now than they were just 6 months ago, or they look like harder. And in a way, it's understandable because this Arab wave has hit the toughest regimes, the most autocratic regimes, only later in the process. So it's really now that the Arab wave is encountering real resistance by entrenched regimes willing to use very brutal force.
I think in the Western, in countries like Australia, there's a bit of a tendency to look at this as one homogenous thing, where in fact there's lots of different countries at lots of different stages.
The wave is composed of all the same elements, the same grievances, the same yearning for dignity, for economic opportunity, for social mobility, and so on. At the same time, a wave crashes differently depending on the shore it crashes on, right? I mean, if it crashes on sand or on rock, I mean, a wave crashes differently. That's and so in political terms, it means that the outcome will depend on the political, ethnic, sectarian makeup of the societies, their level of institutional development, the role of their armed forces, and so on. So yes, the outcome will be fundamentally different depending on where you are. I mean, look at Egypt may be going through a difficult phase now, but Egypt is a nation and is a state. I mean, there is wide agreement about this among the Egyptians, regardless of their religion or political leanings. If you look next door, Libya, well, Libya is a much younger country with no real national sense, very powerful tribes, and so on. And I assume that the possibility of fragmentation in Libya is greater than it is in Egypt. So yes, the outcomes will differ depending on the country.
I think another tendency for outsiders looking in is to assume that this process, which actually, as you said, is very much a step-by-step process and uneven steps, will lead to the sort of liberal democracy that, in the sense that we understand it here. Is that unrealistic?
I think the real assumption is in the West is the opposite, that actually it will inevitably lead to the rise of Islamist parties. And I think it's pretty much in the middle. No, I mean, I don't expect the rise of liberal democracy that quickly, but it took the West, 200-300 years to get through it. And actually, West was a much bloodier place than the Middle East ever was. I mean, let's remember, only 60 years ago, tens of millions were being killed in Europe on, you know, same in Australia or other places. So let's be fair to Arabs. They're going through a very difficult process and a bloody one as well. But, you know, in comparative and historical terms, not that bad. The other assumption here is has to do with the rise of Islamist movements. Well, Islamist movements have proven more moderate than most people expected. They're not just mainstream parties in the sense they're legitimate parties operating, but they've also adapted their discourse and their demands to the perceived societal changes in the Arab world. So I don't think either extreme scenario is likely to emerge, the liberal democracy or Islamic republics or theocracies.
I mean, one country that's put up as an example is Indonesia, as a country that has transitioned to democracy and a majority Muslim country, but still a very secular political system. Do you think that this could be some sort of model?
Well, Indonesia certainly. Turkey probably because it's closer geographically and politically and culturally to the Arab world. But these are two examples where you actually had mainstream Islamist parties that, you know, don't look that different from Christian Democrats in Europe or other places, who actually understand that governing is, well, about governance and public policy. It's not about ideology. And these are examples of countries that have improved, of parties that have improved the economic fortunes of their population. So, you know, and have managed to keep their countries as part of the global system, not as pariahs. I mean, if you look at Iran, Iran is a pariah nation in the global community, whereas Turkey and Indonesia are, you know, accepted members of the international community. Turkey is in the G20 and so. So these are models because, you know, of how well they did politically in terms of, you know, respecting the outcome of elections and so on, economically in terms of improving the lot of their population, and globally in terms of staying within the international system.
So it sounds like you're fairly optimistic then.
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think a lot can go wrong if those civil wars really escalate. I mean, we're only in the beginning, and I think in Syria and Yemen, things can get much worse. In Libya, I mean, you know, I'm optimistic about Libya, but you know, still, you know, civil war in the Mediterranean, that's quite something. I'm optimistic in the sense that those upheavals were long overdue. The Arab world had been suffering from those ills for, you know, decades now, and, you know, objectively speaking, we all knew that things were rotten. So that this kind of awakening is very important for people to start taking responsibility for their own future, but also, you know, question the basic social contract between them and their rulers. And I think that's healthy. I mean, when you look at the quality and level of public debate in Egypt today or Tunisia or in other places, it's fascinating, it's amazing, and yes, it's uplifting. That's where I fall.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us here in Australia, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.